Is AOC running for president? And will the oligarchy fight back? We're going to find out on Not Suitable for Democracy. Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy. My name is Nick Hobby, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to explore the Fight the Oligarchy Tour, its impact, what it means electorally, and what that means between now and 2026 midterms. We've got some time to discuss, and of course, it's really early to make anything definitive, but this does set the direction up in a good way, or maybe not, for Democrats. But first, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to the third episode of Not Suitable for Democracy. It's going to be a fun one, so make sure that if you like what you hear and want to learn more, subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For a deeper dive, make sure to check out my Substack at nsfdpod.substack.com. Or if you'd like to connect or message me on Instagram, you can follow at nsfd_pod. Fight the oligarchy, am I right? So if you haven't been to a Bernie Sanders rally, just know that it is like no other experience you'll probably ever get to just feel and understand and hear and just take it all in. It definitely is a one-of-a-kind journey. So with all that said, Fight the Oligarchy Tour had huge numbers, and before I get into sharing all of those, just, if you have the time, go online, YouTube, and search for any of the rallies, right? Bernie Sanders did great rallies in like Nebraska and Colorado, and then AOC joined Bernie Sanders on the tour toward the end of March and into April, and during their time together, they drew massive crowds. They were both fearless and courageous, and I can go on and on and on, but you gotta watch. So anyway, I'll share really quickly. Like, I was very fortunate back in 2019 to attend the Bernie Sanders rally where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did speak at that rally back in, I think it was like September or October of that year. And it was such a magnificent day. The sun was shining. It was warm out. It wasn't too hot, right? And that was when, Bernie Sanders pulled the biggest crowd of his career at that point with 26,000 attendees. I was grateful to be there early, so I got a fairly close view near the stage, listening to every word. And plus all the speakers he had that day. Tiffany Caban spoke, AOC spoke, and there's so many other great leaders out there. And it was just so inspiring. Like, it's something that I'll never forget. I was there with a few friends, and we really got to take it all in. And, little did we know how the future would hold up since 2019. But that gave us so much hope. And that is something that you cannot recreate at the drop of a hat or the snap of a finger. So I give Bernie Sanders so much credit for building this movement all these years later, and now using that same energy, that same just vehicle for change, inspiring people by getting them off the couch and into these stadiums, these parks, right, wherever they're holding the rallies, just getting people involved to be a part of something. Now for some numbers, okay. So first off, the entire tour from February through April, there were 254,931 attendees. Over 250,000 people showed up across all these states, even in Republican districts, like all over the country, between Colorado, California, Arizona, right? Even Montana. Like, people were showing up in numbers that we have not seen since Barack Obama was running in 2008, okay? So, like, for those of you who have lived through that and remember those rallies, right, for hope and change, like, this is next level. Give you an example. Even in Los Angeles, California, that was the biggest rally Senator Sanders and Rep. Ocasio-Cortez ever held together with the most people in attendance, with a whopping 36,000 people in LA to hear Senator Sanders and Rep. Ocasio-Cortez talk about fighting the oligarchy. 36,000 people. That is like football stadium size. That's insane. That's wild. I love it. And just the fact that 9,000 in Missoula, Montana, right? And like tens of thousands, in Colorado, Arizona, like people are coming out because of what's happening in the White House, what's happening to people in federal agencies, right? And now this is all going on with the backdrop of what's happening in terms of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? People were hearing about how he disappeared. People didn't know where he was. So like that also played a role in having people come out because they are not happy with what's happening in this administration. It's quite scary. But with everything said, right, people were inspired. People were motivated. They wanted to get out, do something, get involved, be part of something. So with all of the rallies, right, like out of the 16 rallies, 13 of them were held in Republican districts, right, congressional districts. And, you would think like people wouldn't show up, right? It's Republican. Why would they listen to AOC and Bernie? But that's not necessarily true. Also, keeping ties to locality, there were 8 members of Congress who were invited to speak at the rallies, right? Democratic, of course, but point being is that Democratic Congress members, not all from the districts, right? Some nearby, and some also, visiting from other parts of the country. But definitely great to show that solidarity, that it's not just, one district and it's very siloed out, but we're in this movement together. All 435 districts are in this together because there's Democrats and there's liberals and there's independents and people who really want change all over the country in every part. At least now we're seeing the impact on social media. What we can say is that it has expansive reach, and the reach for how many people who weren't at the rallies are getting to experience the energy and those special moments. For example, AOC shared on her Instagram at the Bakersfield rally, she got to meet with the Dolores Huerta, the prominent feminist, labor activist, union organizer who has done incredible work for her over the course of her lifetime. Like, she's fought so many hard fights, even like brutally attacked by the police because she was such a threat to the status quo. Like, she's like devoted and dedicated so much of her life to fighting for progress, especially for labor. So the fact that AOC was celebrating the quiet moment she had with her, holding her hand and thanking her, it just goes to show like this is why people need to understand their history, learn about the impact of what these actions mean, holding a rally, organizing, right, protesting. It all comes together because most of the rights and freedoms we have is thanks to people like Dolores Huerta and AOC and Bernie Sanders all fighting for a better tomorrow. On top of that, AOC and Bernie came with a worker-focused message, right? We need to be fighting the oligarchy, taxing the rich, so we can improve the lives of unions, labor workers, right? People who want higher wages, job security, and just better regulations that lift all of us up. So with that in mind, there were 6 national union presidents, and there were 15 local union leaders. So again, tying in unions into the message, right? Showing that solidarity across all walks of life. It just makes for a more powerful message and builds that community where it doesn't necessarily matter, who you voted for per se, in the sense that if everyone is willing to fight for someone that you don't know, right? Not me, us, then you are welcome into the movement, especially if you are all about improving the lives of all Americans so that we can all live a dignified life. Beautiful message, short, sweet, straight to the point, simple, poignant. That's what we need. And AOC and Bernie delivered that. So with all these rallies, right? Gonna throw some more numbers at you. Who actually attended, right? Are they impactful, right? Will they move the needle? Will they make a difference? I mean, it's one thing to get people out of their house or off the couch, right, to a rally. But then what? Like, it may not mean anything if all these people don't act on any specific action, right? So first, for some context, who actually came to the rallies? Well, it's safe to say that, all walks of life, people from every background probably came to these rallies. Just generally speaking, probably a good guess. First and foremost, out of all of the attendees, about 7% of them were registered Republicans. And we know from the 2024 election that a huge number of Republicans voted for Trump. So it is actually safe to say that a lot of those registered Republicans who went to go see Bernie and AOC were Trump supporters. And that's a good thing. We should be letting people who want to hear the message and learn about what AOC and Bernie are actually saying, right? Now, granted, I'm sure, like any rally, there's going to be some agitators and people who aren't there in good faith, right? Not saying those 7% were there in bad faith. I think we need to assume they were there in good faith, they want to learn, so at least let them hear and experience for themselves what's it like to experience a Bernie and AOC rally while fighting the oligarchy. With that said, 32% of those in attendance were not registered Democrats, not including the 7% Republicans. So that means 32% were either independent, maybe even green, maybe even working families, maybe even libertarian, right? Just not registered as Democrat. But it could also mean they were no affiliation. So if you're not registered as a Democrat, you could just by default be a registered voter, but just not have a party affiliation. So 32% is almost a third, right? Almost 1 in 3 people in attendance were not a Democrat and not a registered Republican. Pretty wild. Now, on top of that, right? Granted, we know the rest were registered Democrats, but with that said, 42% did not have a college degree. So that just goes to show, while so many 2024 exit polls show Republicans captured the no college degree vote, well, it turns out 42% attended the Bernie and AOC Fight the Oligarchy Tour rallies. That should tell everyone that this message resonates for those outside the Democratic Party as much as those inside the Democratic Party. It's a strong message. It cuts across party lines because it doesn't matter what each party stands for. It matters what we're doing outside of politics with our everyday lives. Are we fighting for more jobs? Are we fighting for more resources for opportunity? Are we fighting for healthcare reform? Are we fighting for a better planet, a livable wage, right? Even stronger immigration policies, right? These are all things that we can be fighting for together to improve our quality of life. And that is part of what brings more people into the fold, because there's something for everyone in this movement. It really is how we can force positive change throughout our society to improve everyday lives for everyday Americans. Now, the good news is that by the end of the rally, AOC shared that there was a letter signed by 12 Republican members of Congress that would not commit to a budget that would cut Medicaid, right? So if it's in the budget that they're going to cut Medicaid, those 12 Republicans would not commit to it. And out of those 12, 4 of those Republicans were from the districts that AOC and Bernie targeted during the Fight the Oligarchy Tour. So believe it or not, their rally actually added more people to that letter. And those 12, that's enough people, enough Republicans to sink the Republican vote for reconciliation should they need to vote on it one more time. So if there's any changes in the Senate bill, the House has to vote on it one more time. So that would guarantee that the bill would not pass because of those 12, and thanks to 4 of them, about 33%, from AOC and Bernie Fight the Oligarchy Tour. That is progress. So already right there, they're already moving the needle in a great direction for change. So outside of all that, Trump is not on the ticket in 2026. With that said, there is a good chance Democrats have a good shot at organizing and building enough of a coalition to take down a lot of these vulnerable Republicans, right? The fact that a bunch of these Republicans, they sign the letter, they don't want to lose their seat, but also right now we see a lot of anti-Trump fervor with everything that's going on in the White House. It doesn't bode well for the future of the Republican Party in the midterms. However, this is only key if Democrats can get it together. And notoriously, they don't always do that. So, it's just the way it works out. I'll give you the best example. So, while Bernie and AOC have done a really great job, organizing the rallies, getting people out there and involved, now it's Democrats' time to shine. If AOC and Bernie are planting the seeds for a growing opposition to get people interested, not only from the Democratic Party, but outside of the Democratic Party, they are setting up the framework for a really strong win come 2026 in the midterms and potentially even in 2028. Because again, Trump is setting the tone right now and people are not happy with what is going on. So if that energy can be carried out, there's a good chance that Democrats can find success. And not only Democrats, right? I'm sure there's going to be a lot more independent candidates running too. And that is a good thing. We want people who can be held accountable and be transparent and not operate with how the party tells them to, which, to be frank, the Democratic Party is known for having a lot of corporate donors. So if we want true transparency and true accountability, right, an independent candidate may be the way to go. Not necessarily for every district, but yeah, we're going to need independent candidates running, like Bernie Sanders, to really show how serious we are about foregoing corporate cash to really invest in quality politicians or quality elected officials that understand the needs of the people and are fighting to deliver. So what is the impact of the Fight the Oligarchy Tour? So part of it too, let's not forget, is at the end of the tour, everyone who signed up received communications for 2 calls to action. One was to call their representative and demand town halls and meetings, right? So no matter what party they were from, right? Out of the 16 rally locations, 13 were held in Republican districts. So, these constituents are majority Republican, if not a huge population of them. The second action was also to contact the representative, but this time to demand no cuts to Medicaid and to fight for policies for taxing the rich. That was key in the second demand because that's what ties in fighting the oligarchy all together, right? One is that we're seeing Elon Musk go rampaging on so many of our federal agencies, and causing some real harm, not only to federal workers, but even the life-saving programs and those who depend on them. So that's number one, no cuts to Medicaid. And 2, taxing the rich. A lot of the problems we see in society are because we don't have the resources or the funding to get them over the finish line, right? Better infrastructure, better education, right? Even access to healthcare all require serious money. And we can do that by taxing the billionaires. With those 2 calls to action, right? With 250,000 people, right? If everyone does act on those actions, then it's going to make a pretty big dent, right? 250,000 people is no small feat. And more importantly, it can make that difference, especially, again, if some of the voters or in some of these 2026 midterm elections come down to 10,000 votes or less. So one of these rallies could persuade enough people in attendance to actually swing an election. Think about that. So the impact can make a difference. But again, it's going to come down to the people staying motivated, staying engaged, and for them to want to be a part of the movement. So, what about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Is she running for president? Now, some may say yes, some may say no, but let's just think about how actions speak louder than words, right? We know in the press that both AOC and Bernie have denied any sense of running for higher office, like, no, she's not running for Senator of New York, no, she's not running for president in 2028, no, 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 no. And then there are some polls out there too, which constantly keep AOC, in the press. And I'm not saying that AOC is funding these polls. It's probably Harris's team who is putting out these polls, because if I had to guess, VP Harris is very much considering running for president again in 2028. But at the end of the day, most of the results show AOC in like the top 3, right? So like the fact that she's constantly near the top, getting like some pretty net favorability is great. And now she's building a national presence. I mean, she always has. Since she was elected in 2018, AOC has, toured the country, going to a number of events, giving speeches, but even just digitally, right? Like showing up on podcasts. Her Twitter presence is one of the largest, especially on Blue Sky, where she is the number 1 most followed. And, all of her reach, right? The number of followers that she has, the number of people who listen to what she has to say, consume her content, it's quite remarkable. And not only that, it's beyond what most members of Congress or elected officials really have. And with that said, right, granted, it is generational, millennial generation, definitely indicative of that. But at the end of the day, right, she has great infrastructure that's been continuously building for a potential run for higher office, right? But again, if her presence can be known just outside of the deep progressive blue urban areas or urban centers, and she can expand that reach, right, to purple districts and even red states, that could mean so much more for her future ambitions. So if AOC is running for office, I truly support that. And hey, if she's not, don't forget to even take that responsibility, that burden, would just be so costly to like your mental health, friends and family, protecting your loved ones, especially when we know the current guy in the White House, it kind of is like, putting your life on the line if you were to run for president in like this day and age with Trump in the White House. So should she choose not to, I would support that too, right? It's really what's best for her. At the end of the day, it's like what the community wants, district wants, what she wants, right? I know she'll make the right decision, what's best for her. But at the end of the day, all I'm saying is if she says AOC 2028, I'm game. It'd be great to have AOC as president. That would just change the world and this country, like just in so many ways that are unimaginable in like the best way possible. But then, it wouldn't be an overnight journey, right? Like the fact that, we saw what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. I think there were a lot of, inter-party moves that were made behind the scenes that led to all of that. So I give Bernie a lot of credit, but he didn't win. So because of that, I have reservations for how, should AOC decide to run for president, I would wholeheartedly believe that there would be more behind the scenes maneuvering, politicking that would prevent her from winning. Not to say that she couldn't win, right? But when you're going up against the establishment, especially on the Democratic side, we know that they mean business and they will do anything virtually possible. On top of that, right, if she's taking on the oligarchy, that means you're going after people's money, like corporate interests, corporations, the billionaires, right? All the monopolies out there. Challenging power like that would be no easy feat at all. So, again, I think challenging corporate power, what we'd most likely see would be an influx of super PAC money, right? Just pouring in to opposition against AOC. For whatever office she chooses to run, billionaires will just flood as much of their money into super PACs and other campaigns just to ensure that she does not win. Again, it's not to say that she can't. She doesn't. It's not like she does not have the talent or the messaging finesse. It's really just that, going up against a lot of money that pays for a lot of negative ads that can easily persuade people just makes for a much harder terrain. But even more so, not just the political ads, but think about voting, right? The Republican Party in control has like a huge grip on state houses, Congress, the White House, and all levels of government right now in the Republican Party are trying to suppress the vote. They're making it harder for people to vote. The SAVE Act that passed the House, they're trying to save elections, right? The messaging. But what's really happening is that they're putting up more barriers for something that should be super easy. But point being is, right, we see polling locations closed down. We see funding and resources being diverted from polling locations and Board of Elections and different entities that are supposed to support voting access to other priorities. And, when that happens, so for instance, like voting hours become more limited, early voting and mail-in ballots disappear. We even saw in 2020 where there were like mail-in ballot containers or collectors, right? Like the boxes were set on fire. So people will stop at nothing when it comes to challenging power. And it's sad because it shouldn't be like that. Everyone should just play a fair game, cast your one vote, one person, one vote, boom, you're done. And that's our democracy. With that said, I would love to see AOC run for president one day. Her choice and her choice alone. But there's going to be tons of uphill battles between voter suppression, between influx of billionaire cash flowing into, just pouring into the election, and a lot of behind the scenes Democratic Party politicking. Like AOC is not Bernie, where Bernie ran as an independent, and AOC is a Democrat. But I would assure you that she would have to make serious concessions for them to work with her, rather than ensure that she doesn't win the primary. And I hate to say it, but that's not going to happen. No matter what AOC says or does, they will never truly support her because there's always going to be an uphill battle. It's not that AOC can't win president. It just would make things really, really hard. And we got to set the expectations right now because people think, oh, she's got it in the bag, where it's like, no, 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 no. Y'all forget. We are dealing with the Democratic establishment. We are dealing with corporate power. We are dealing with the Republican Party. All three are quite ruthless in their quest for ambition, money, and power. So at the end of the day, it's going to be the 99% that takes on the 1%. They have the money, but we have the people. Stay in this fight, stay engaged, be informed, and make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure that we can change the future of America for the better. And that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned a lot and maybe inspired just a little between now and the 2026 midterms. A lot can happen, but hey, we got to have these conversations, talk to your friends, your neighbors, your family, and everyone in between so that we can make some progress going forward. And with that said, if you like what you hear and want to learn more, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like to go in for a deeper dive, then check out my Substack at nsfdpod.substack.com. And hey, if you have any questions or want to connect, find me on Instagram at nsfd_pod. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to check out more episodes. And remember, democracy is not suitable without you.